You ever send some crypto and just wonder, like, what really happens in that gap between hitting send and getting that confirmation? Turns out it's not instant. There's this whole hidden world, this journey your transaction has to go on. And today, we're going to pull back the curtain on that journey and talk about crypto's secret waiting room.
Okay, so you hit send. Maybe it's Bitcoin, maybe something else. It's gone from your wallet, right? But it isn't immediately on the blockchain. So where is it? Is it just floating out there in the ether? Not exactly, but it's definitely not home yet either.
And that's really the key thing to understand. It's not like a simple bank transfer. A crypto transaction has to pass a bunch of tests. It gets checked, it gets sorted, and then, and this is the wild part, it has to compete to get picked before it can be carved into that permanent, unchangeable record we call the blockchain. And that's the secret we're diving into. This waiting room, it's where all the potential transactions are just hanging out. It's a busy place, kind of chaotic, super competitive, and it has an official name, the Mempool.
All right, so let's break it down. What does this journey from hitting send to actually getting into a block, what does that look like?
So there are basically four main stages here. First up is validation. The network checks, hey, is this legit? Do you actually have the funds? Simple enough. Then it goes into that waiting room we just talked about. After that comes the selection process, getting picked from the crowd. And finally, what drives that selection? Well, that's all about the incentive.
And there we have it, the official definition, the mempool. You can think of it as a big holding bay for every single valid transaction the network knows about, but hasn't confirmed yet. It's kind of like the network's short-term memory pool, which is actually where the name comes from. Memory pool. Mempool. Makes sense, right?
Okay, so your transaction is in the mempool, but it's not alone. It's in there with maybe thousands of others. So how on earth does it get picked to move on? This is where it gets really interesting, because it is absolutely not first come, first served.
The whole problem boils down to one thing: limited space. I want you to picture each block on the blockchain like it's a bus, and that bus has a fixed number of seats. Now, when the network gets busy, you've got way more people waiting at the bus stop, that's the mempool, than can actually fit on the next bus. And that right there creates a super competitive market for those seats.
So, the big question is, how do you get priority? How do you get on that bus? Well, this quote really says it all. You pay for it. The folks building these buses, we call them miners, and you include a small fee, basically a tip, with your transaction to pay them for their work. The higher the fee, the more attractive your transaction is, and the better your spot in line. And this is exactly why transactions sometimes get stuck. If you set your fee too low when it's busy, miners are just going to keep picking the higher-paying transactions ahead of yours over and over again.
This chart really drives the point home. You have to remember, miners are economically rational. They're running a business, right? So of course they're going to pick the transactions that pay the highest fees to maximize their profit. It's just common sense. So as you can see here, you pay a high fee, you're on the next bus out. You pay a low fee, well, you might be waiting at that bus stop for a long time, especially during rush hour.
Now here's something that's really interesting. This whole selection process, it's not the same for every single crypto network out there. Let's take a look at two different ways of doing things: the classic Bitcoin model and a newer approach from a network called Kaspa.
So you can see the difference pretty clearly here. Bitcoin's approach is what we call deterministic. That just means it's predictable, a fixed rule. The one miner who finds the next block, they just skim the highest paying transactions right off the top. Simple, predictable. The downside, though, is that it can be a pure pay-to-play game. Now, Kaspa's method is probabilistic, which means there's an element of chance involved. It still prioritizes high fees, for sure, but it introduces a little bit of randomness. And that trade-off means that even a slightly lower fee transaction has a shot at getting in, which some argue could lead to a fair fee market over the long run.
And here's a great way to think about it. Bitcoin's mempool, it's like a super strict, single-file VIP line at a club. The person who pays the most gets in first, guaranteed. Kaspa, on the other hand, is more like a multi-lane toll plaza. Yeah, there's an express lane for the high payers, and it's definitely the fastest way through, but the other lanes are still moving, which gives more people a chance to get where they're going.
So you might be thinking, why? Why go through all this trouble? Why do we even need this complicated waiting room in the first place? Well, it turns out the mempool plays some absolutely critical roles in keeping the whole network healthy and running smoothly.
First off, the mempool is basically the network's shock absorber.
It handles those huge spikes in traffic, making sure your transaction doesn't just get dropped or lost when things get crazy busy. It also creates a system, a competitive one, sure, but an orderly system for getting into a block. Honestly, without it, the network would just be total chaos during rush hour.
And then, finally, a miner selects your transaction and puts it into a confirmed block. And just like that, its time in limbo is over. It officially becomes a part of the permanent blockchain history. At that exact moment, it gets wiped from the mempools of all the computers, we call them nodes, on the network. The journey is complete.
So next time you send a crypto transaction, you'll know exactly what's going on behind the scenes, that whole secret journey through the competitive waiting room. But it really brings up a big question for the future, doesn't it? As these networks get faster and start scaling to handle millions or even billions of users, how is this mempool going to have to change? Will we even need a waiting room anymore, or will it evolve into something totally different? That's definitely something to keep an eye on as this space develops.